Okay, so this morning I wanted to finish up what we had started looking at last week. Now, don't worry if you didn't see last week's lesson. It doesn't matter. You will always learn something in the live lessons. Doesn't matter if you were there last week or you're just here as a new student this week. Listen to what we're doing, look at what we're doing, and if there's anything that's really confusing, you're welcome to send me a message on the web chat system, not here in Zoom, but in the web chat system at the end of the lesson if there's something you really struggle to understand. Okay. So, good morning to the rest of you who are just joining. Nice to see you here. All right, so I had said to you that last week we were looking at one of the teachers' resources from that Cambridge provides for IGCSE First Language English, and we had started looking at a comprehension extract, and we touched on the idea of summary. And I wanted to continue looking at summarizing. How do you go about summarizing in an efficient way? Because this is something you're going to have to do under a time limit in exam. So I wanted to tie up the concepts that we hadn't gotten around to looking at in last week's lesson. Okay. And then for those of you who are worried about this, just in case you wanted something a bit more challenging to think about, next week I would like to look at some poetry with you, because I think poetry is very, very important in terms of honing in your analysis skills. So if there is a poem you would like me to look at, you can send me a suggested title or the poem itself on the web chat system, and I will choose one or two that we can look at in next week's lesson. Okay, just to give you something a bit different. But for now, let's look at summarizing. Okay, so the extract that we looked at was, the topic was a matter of time. And we had done a few things last week. We had looked at, creating a mind map where we threw out ideas and I wrote them down. We brainstormed so that we could see just how much we already have as a basis for the knowledge, for knowledge, as a basis of knowledge for the concept of time. And you came up with some brilliant ideas, so we did that. And the reason you do that is so that when you are confronted with an extract, you already have some basis you work on. There are some ideas you might expect to find in the extract, and they are familiar because you have that basic knowledge. And then we looked at some definitions of verbs given to us in bold, and that's important because it tests how well you understand the vocabulary in an extract. It tests your own vocabulary, and also it forces you to perhaps work out meaning based on context. The meaning of a word based on how it's used in an extract. And you'll find that you do that when you have a comprehension. You might not know every single word. So that's what you'll generally tend to do. And then we looked at identifying and listing some characteristics of argumentative language. And we had ended off doing that, looking at how the writer had used rhetorical questions, had used triple structures to emphasize an idea, had used inclusive language like we, and exclamations for a lively tone to engage with the reader. And then this idea of concessive language, where you give concession in some way. So there's a contrast. So the writer will acknowledge the argument they're putting forward, but they also acknowledge the opposite side of the argument, trying to create a contrast of sorts, showing you that they've thought about the topic fully. Okay, so that's kind of things like, of course, or which is not to say, or despite this. Okay, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when we talk about concessive language. So we have touched on all of these, and if you'd like a bit more information on that, you can always ask for last week's lesson notes. Okay, but today I wanted to focus on question 4, where as the teacher I must give students the summary writing process handout, which is attached to this lesson, for them to refer to. Ask them to identify and list the points in text 1A, the text we looked at last week, to use in the summary. Now, what is the summary going to be about? Well, it's recommended strategies for improving time management, okay? And it tells you there are 15 points. Right. So let's just go down to, that's the first thing we have to do. We'll come back to these other ideas just now. Remember this huge text that it took forever to get through? Well, if you read through that more closely, you would notice that there are 15 main points about how to maximize your time management skills. Okay. So if you were to summarize this based on that focus, the focus has to be on how to, the recommended strategies to maximize your time management. You would follow the summary writing process. So summaries don't just happen, there's actually a process behind them. And you might not realize it, but you do it automatically on some level when you do a summary. And thank you for letting me know you're late. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So what is the first part in the summary writing process? Well, first of all, you will skim read. I assume you've all heard of skimming, and yes, it's also about throwing stones over a lake, which is a great talent. But in this case, it's all about getting the gist of a text, the overall meaning of a text. So when you first read a text, you get the gist of it, but you're not really reading it when you skim. You're just looking at main ideas in a very sort of light manner. Your eyes are floating over the extract, catching phrases here and there. So it says, you read the passage for the gist of time, place, genre, and topic, identifying unknown words to be worked out using one of the 4 methods. Okay. So once again, I'm just emphasizing it's for gist. You're not paying attention to the detail. It's a light reading of passage. So the first thing that you can do to work out meaning, remember those 5 verbs we looked at last time, these ones in bold? The first thing you've got to do to work out meaning, if you did not know the meaning of a word, is to use one of these methods, 4 methods, syllabic breakdowns. You can break a word down into its syllables. For example, the word capable. Does this help you in any way understand what capable means? Not necessarily based on syllabic breakdown, but if we look at the similarity to another word in English, we see that root word able. And so you should have some idea of what it means to be capable. You are able to do something, all right? And then another way you can work out the meaning of a word is, once again, breaking it down into its syllables, or a root word like multi or many, which means many, right? So multiple, multimedia, all of these things, if you know that how that word multi is applied, you can work out the meaning of the word multimedia. And then you can also use a similarity to a word in another language. So for those of you who have a different home language that is not particularly English, perhaps there are some words in your home language that are similar to the word in English, so you could guess its meaning. And then the way that most people do it is guessing from context. Okay? And I have put a video link in here for you to see some other methods you can use to work out meaning based on context. So feel free to type that link in if you get a copy of this lesson. If you ask me for a copy of this lesson, then you can have a look at that for yourselves. But I want to focus on this idea of guessing from context. Let's go back up here and look at one of those words. Procrastinate. Let's say you didn't know what procrastinate means. So let's read the sentence. It's tempting to procrastinate and repeatedly put off a job we don't want to do. Full stop. Okay. I'm just going to put the full stop there. What I'm trying to say is, look at this section. Do you see how procrastinate is actually given to you as an explanation there? It's tempting to procrastinate and repeatedly put off a job. So that must be what procrastinate means, to put off a job, to delay something, right? Okay, and remember, if you want a copy of this lesson or last week's lesson, please send me a message in the main web chat system, not here in Zoom, okay? Not here in Zoom, but in the main web chat. And what about this idea of optimize based on context? Knowing how to optimize scheduling is another time management strategy. Okay, and we have a colon, so we know that more information is going to be given to us. Some of us work better early in the morning, some in the afternoon, and others in the evenings, or even late at night. All right, so can we work out optimize based on this information? Well, it's talking about the concept of working better. And this links to the idea of optimizing something, to make something as efficient as it possibly can be. But do you see how you can use context generally, not always, but generally, to work out the meaning of a word. So that's one of the strategies you can use when you're confronted with unknown vocabulary in an extract. All right, so this is all about skim reading. You would have read through this lightly, gotten the main idea, but now the second part is going to be all about scan reading or scanning. And this is when you're looking for the main details. All right, so for scan reading, what it wants to do is, after reading the summary question, okay, so it's actually the question you need to focus on. And you'll notice that with Cambridge, reading the question very, very closely is important. If you don't get the question, if you don't answer the question asked, it doesn't matter how brilliant your piece of writing is. You must always break the question down into its essential ideas. So after reading the summary question and underlining its keywords, return to the passage, okay? So we're looking for detail, and we look for detail in the question and in the passage. So let's have a look at the question, all right? Ask students to identify and list the points in text 1A to use in a summary of recommended strategies for improving time management. So we need a list of points, main points that we're going to use, because this is how you summarize. You get your main points, and those main points have to refer to the idea of recommended strategies for improving time management. In other words, they have to be a strategy, right? A strategy that is recommended by the writer. Fair enough, that's one thing. So I'll show you an example of the list that they've made, the list of 15 that they came up with. Yes, let's do that now. Let's do that before we do something else. Okay, so we'd come down to the extract. Now, if we read this intro, tell me if you see a strategy here in the introduction. How well do you manage your time? Do you feel overloaded, pressured by deadlines as though you should be in 2 places at once? Do you rush things, half finish things, leave things to the last minute? Is there a strategy? Is there a recommended strategy here? Yes or no? What would you say? No, correct. There's no strategy. There's just a prompt of questions that prompt you to think, right? And we touched on this as an argumentative strategy, rhetorical questions, prompting you to think. So no, there is no strategy here. What about this next part? The most successful and productive people are those who control time rather than let it control them. Many of us would like to be better time managers, but have fallen into bad habits or lack effective strategies. If we could only avoid common pitfalls and adopt common sense practices, we could change our lives overnight. Are there any specific strategies that are recommended here? Good, and good morning to you who just joined us. Okay, so somebody says no and somebody says yes. So this was a tricky one, okay? This was a tricky question. There are actually no strategies per se, all right? No particular strategies, but there's an overall introduction of concepts to be explored, and that's the difference, okay? Avoid common pitfalls. We don't know what those are yet. We don't have that information. Adopt common sense practices. Great advice, but what is the strategy to do that? So they've given it an overview, which you think might be a strategy, but no, we need more detail. So at this point, we still don't have a strategy, a realistic, practical strategy. So you might notice that political speakers say in this area, they never actually give practical strategies. But anyway, let's not go into that. Here, notice now, one of the main failures is to not keep a to-do list. So that's by the end of each day, there will be things we should have done but didn't because we forgot about them or didn't organize our time well enough to fit them in. Of course, having a list does no good if you don't look at it or if it has an impossible number of items on it so that they have to be moved on to the next day and the next, or if you actually have no intention of doing those things. So here we're getting more into detail, more into the nitty-gritty of how you can go about maximizing, managing your time. Okay. And I will take you down now to the list of points that they make to show you how they summarize each of those parts. And that's the kind of thing you would be doing. You work through the introduction, you look for very specific detail, you've got an overview, but you need to go into something precise. And they've extracted the precise information, showing you how to do that. And we'll look at that now. I just want to finish this idea of scan reading before we look at that list. So after reading the summary question and underlining its keywords, return to the passage and highlight the relevant material for each part of the question. And those are the points we're going to look at now. Select only the essential word or phrase. In other words, examples, repetitions, direct speech, figurative language, and trivial details should be excluded. You only want the main details. So if we go back up to that paragraph where it talks about procrastination, it's tempting to procrastinate and repeatedly put off a job which we don't want to do, but this just creates guilt, which spoils pleasure in doing other things, and panic later when we realize we haven't left enough time to make a decent job of it. It's quite a long sentence, right? So a lot of ideas going on there, but if you had to sum that up as a main point, key ideas, or a key idea, what would it be? I'm going to read it one more time. It's tempting to procrastinate and repeatedly put off a job we don't want to do, but this just creates guilt, which spoils pleasure in doing other things, and panic later when we realize we haven't left enough time to make a decent job of it. What is the main point here? Good. Very nice. It is unpleasant to procrastinate. Here's a suggestion. Great. Yes, the main point is about procrastination. Okay. Unpleasant might not be the most effective way of putting this. I know why you're saying unpleasant, because they talk about guilt and panic. And so, yes, it's unpleasant, but think about it in the context of a strategy. So it's not necessarily about something, yes, it will be unpleasant to procrastinate because it will just come back to bite you is what they're saying. But is unpleasant the word we want to use in our summary? What could we replace it with that would be a bit more strategic? Good. It is unwise to procrastinate, yes, because this leaves it open to the possibility of other things becoming a problem because you're procrastinating. Good. Well done. Yes. We could say it's inefficient to procrastinate. Or we could just say avoid procrastination to maximize time management. Okay. So when you're trying to get to the nitty-gritty, good, you're going to write your first idea, but you might find that as we've just done now, we refine it. So yes, we might say unpleasant, and then we look at it again and say, but there's that a strategy we want to give to somebody. You know, if you're having a bullet point list of things to do, maybe unpleasant wouldn't be the best thing, but we've done that because we want to create that idea in our mind that we can then refine and work on to get to unwise and to get to inefficient, etc. So good, fantastic, suggestions there, guys. Thank you so much. So now, let's look at this list that they have created. Okay, so they have highlighted all these 15 things to do, and they are the practical strategic things because it is a list of strategies. So they say things like, keep a to-do list and refer to it. And you'll find all the explanation that goes around that, all the detail that goes around that in the extract. But the main thing is keep a to-do list and refer to it. The next thing is don't aim to do too much in one day, each day. Don't put things on the list you have no intention of doing. Okay, so we already read all of that in that one paragraph, right? Don't put jobs off, but at least make a start. Because if we read further in that procrastination paragraph, you would have seen how they recommend that just starting a job already makes it a bit easier and will encourage you to finish it. How do we put this more succinctly? Don't put jobs off, but at least make a start. And the list continues. Allocate jobs according to the time of day you work best. That was that optimization idea, right? And then it goes on to things we haven't touched on, but which we read last week, and you can read this these for yourself if you ask for these lesson notes. Turn work down that you don't really want or need to do, so you must prioritize, right? Negotiate for an easier task or more time where possible. So be as practical as you can. Delegate when appropriate. Don't try to control everything yourself. Give out to other people. You'll get more things done. Retain good eating and sleep habits. Be precise about the tasks. So don't just say learn Italian. No, read chapter 5 in the Italian book today, work through exercises. Okay, so keep it very precise. Do the most urgent tasks first. That's where you prioritize what needs to be done for which deadline when. Don't spend too much time on the list. That's called avoidance. And I'm sure we're all guilty of that. And here is a nice idea about procrastination, a suggestion that one of your fathers said, do as much as you can today, and then there's less to do tomorrow. A very wise man, absolutely. Do what you can today. Tomorrow will be so much easier if you do that. Thank you for that piece of advice. All right, so be precise about the tasks you have to do. Do the most urgent tasks first. Don't spend too much time on the list. Have long-term goals and relate the tasks to them. So if you're working towards a specific goal with your business, for example, you're going to make sure that each little task you do is orientated towards that and doesn't go off on some tangent that has nothing to do with that ultimate goal. Okay, so refine your focus. And then resist distractions and avoid multitasking. Very, very hard in this social media orientated world that we live in. Take refreshment breaks every few hours. All right, so those are the 15 main points that they've highlighted, and they appear in the order that they appear in the extract. So as the extract works through those points, this is the list they have created. Now, if we go back up to that, after the scan reading, the transfer to plan, it says, transfer the highlighted material that you've underlined in the extract to make a list of all the relevant points as they've done, changing some of the words, they've done that, and phrases into your own words at the same time. So that list, they've already done that. They've made the concepts clear and short with their own words. Sometimes they've reused words. Some technical words cannot be changed. You know, a cylinder is a cylinder. It can't be something else, all right? And some individual words from the passage may be used. So you can replicate the idea of procrastination, for example. But long phrases should not be copied. So if you've got an exact phrase with about 4 to 5 words that are you just replicated, it means you're not summarizing. Okay, you're just copy pasting ultimately. So avoid doing that. Okay. Then structuring the plan. The points in the plan should be grouped logically and reordered to make it possible to combine more than 1 point per sentence. And you can do this in your list using brackets and arrows. Oh, that point connects to that point. So let me talk about that later on together as a concept. And you'll see I've given an example summary in which I do that. This will make it possible to get all the points into a response within the word limit. Now, what I have not read to you is the second part of the question that they give you. Yes, we've got our points, but what is our actual task to do? Well, write the summary, okay, using your points from task 4 in not more than 120 words, okay? So we have these 120 words, kind of a paragraph length, right? In complex sentences. Okay, now it's going to be a bit more difficult. It has to be in complex sentences. And the reason for this is complex sentences allow for the condensation of ideas in a string of ideas. Okay, so that's why they're saying it has to be in complex sentences. And this is hard, okay? And then check your work for accuracy, clarity, and concision of expression. Fine. And then you get a certain mark for content and for style. So we have 120 words and we have to use complex sentences. And because we are running out of time, as usual, I'll just give you some examples of a simple sentence. I waited for the train, okay? There's the subject, I, somebody doing something. The verb is the doing word and the noun is the train, okay? So there's a subject, there's a verb, and there's an object. Subject, verb, object. Now, or noun, if you want to call it that. Now, the compound sentence is two connected independent clauses. And when we talk about independent clauses, they're an idea that can stand on its own. If I say I waited for the train, you understand what I'm talking about. If I say I waited for the train and let's think, and my brothers joined me. Oh, sorry, spelling error there. Joined me. I waited for the train, and here's another concept. My brothers joined me. So there are two concepts that are just connected by the word and, okay, but they are both independent. They could stand on their own. My brothers joined me. I waited for the train. My brothers joined me. Two completely different ideas that are independent of one another. Now, a complex sentence is more complicated, and it usually has an independent clause that can stand on its own and something else that belongs to it. So, for example, I read my magazine while waiting for the train to depart. Now, if we look at the independent clause, one that makes sense by itself, I read my magazine. That makes sense on its own, right? I read my magazine, okay? But what if you had this? While waiting for the train to depart, while waiting for the train to depart, what about waiting for the train to depart? What happened? Give me more information. Do you see how this is the dependent clause? And this is the independent clause. And you could swap them around. They don't have to occur in that particular order. You could say, while waiting for the train, comma, I read my magazine. And there would still be the dependent clause, and there would still be the independent clause. So you can have a look at that for yourselves a bit more closely. But this idea of complex sentences makes the summary a bit harder to do, but at the same time allows you to condense ideas. And so when it comes to writing the summary, it says the summary should be written in an informative style in complex sentences, which means you need to avoid that and connective that we saw there now in the compound sentences. Check afterwards for clarity and concision and for unnecessary repetition. Don't repeat yourself, all of which will affect the writing mark. The summary should be purely objective and without narrative, comment, introduction, or conclusion. So here is my summary. I reordered the points, I collated some of them so that they have something in common that they link to, and I gave the title, Recommended Strategies for Improving Time Management. To improve time management, keep a realistic to-do list checked daily. Although you may want to, do not delay in getting jobs started. By working at your most productive point of view, you can achieve more. When it is necessary, do not worry about turning down unwanted work, negotiating for a task change or more time, or delegating tasks. List your tasks precisely and efficiently, placing the most urgent first. Plan your tasks well, making sure they focus on the achievement of your long-term goals. Decrease inefficiency, avoid distractions and multitasking. Although you should aim to maximize your time, you must take care of your health by eating and sleeping well and taking regular breaks. 120 words.